Bartered into slavery by her family, alien girl found love with the human saved her. Zara was born into a life of luxury, the youngest daughter of the ruling family of a distant star system. Her home was a vast, glittering palace on a planet surrounded by lush forests, crystal-clear lakes, and sprawling cities. The royal court was a place of power and influence, where political alliances were formed and broken in the blink of an eye. Zara was not only a princess, but a symbol of her family's strength and prestige. She had everything a person could want: wealth, beauty, and security. But Zara's world was not as perfect as it seemed. Her father, King Verk, was a ruler who believed that power was everything. He would do anything to keep his throne secure. Zara, however, was different from the rest of her family. She had a kind heart and often felt torn between the political games her family played and her own desire for peace. She would spend hours staring out of the palace windows, wondering if there was more to life than the endless intrigues of the court. But Zara's sense of loyalty to her family kept her there, in the center of it all. Things began to change when Zara was just 16. A warlord from a neighboring star system, a ruthless alien named Thrax, began to rise in power. His empire was growing, and he was known for conquering entire worlds with brutal efficiency. His forces swept through planet after planet, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. King Verk saw an opportunity to gain favor with Thrax and secure his family's future. He knew that Thrax was greedy for more than just land. He wanted control over the galaxy's most valuable resources. King Verk decided to strike a deal with the warlord, one that would keep his family in power. But the deal was not a simple exchange of resources. In the depths of his heart, King Verk knew that the price of Thrax's help would be high. Zara was his youngest and most beautiful daughter, and she had caught the warlord's eye. The king was desperate enough to consider this. He would offer Zara as a tribute to Thrax, a living trophy that would bind the two families in an unbreakable bond. It would keep his family safe, secure their political alliances, and ensure that his throne remained unchallenged. The thought of sacrificing his daughter didn't even seem to faze King Verk. He would do whatever it took to maintain his power. When Zara found out about her father's decision, she was devastated. She couldn't believe that her own family would treat her like a pawn in their political game. She had always known that there were sacrifices to be made in the name of power, but she never imagined that one of those sacrifices would be herself. She confronted her father, demanding to know why he would betray her in such a way. But King Verk simply dismissed her concerns. He told her that this was the way of the world and that she had a duty to her family. Zara felt a deep pain in her heart, knowing that her own father had chosen his throne over his own daughter. With no choice but to obey, Zara was taken from her home. She was locked in a small, cold cell aboard a ship that would take her to Thrax. The journey was long and uncomfortable. She spent the days in silence, staring out of the small window at the stars outside, lost in her thoughts. She wondered how her family could betray her so easily, and she wondered what kind of life awaited her with Thrax. She had heard the stories of his cruelty, how he had enslaved entire populations and destroyed anyone who dared to defy him. The thought of becoming his possession was unbearable, but there was nothing she could do. She was powerless, caught in the cruel twist of fate that her family had set in motion. Zara didn't know how much time passed before the ship finally landed on Thrax's planet, but it felt like an eternity. The warlord's homeworld was a dark, oppressive place, with towering spires and massive, foreboding structures. The air smelled of smoke and metal, and the sky was always clouded with dark, swirling storms. Zara was led through the winding streets of the capital city, surrounded by guards who glared at her with cold, calculating eyes. The people of Thrax's empire had a look of fear in their eyes, as if they were constantly watching their backs, knowing that the slightest mistake could mean their death. When they arrived at Thrax's palace, Zara was immediately taken to a large, opulent chamber. The room was filled with lavish furniture and strange alien artifacts, but there was no warmth, no comfort. It felt more like a prison than a place of power. Zara was forced to kneel before the warlord, her heart racing in her chest. Thrax was tall and imposing, his skin a deep, dark red, with sharp features that made him look like a predator. His eyes glinted with malice, and Zara could see the greed in them as he looked her over, appraising her as if she were an object rather than a person. "You are a beautiful one," Thrax said, his voice low and cold. Your father has given you to me as a token of his loyalty, but you will be more than just a token. You will be my property, my slave." Zara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she knew it would be useless. Thrax had already won. Her fate had been sealed the moment her father had agreed to this cruel bargain. She had no choice but to accept the reality of her situation. The days that followed were a blur of fear and despair. Zara was kept locked away in a small, windowless room, her every movement watched by the guards. She was given no freedom, no agency. She was nothing more than a tool to be used by Thrax as he saw fit. There were times when she would catch glimpses of other slaves, their eyes hollow with despair, their bodies broken by years of abuse. Zara tried to avoid them, not wanting to get too close, but she couldn't help but feel their pain. She felt trapped in a nightmare, one that she couldn't escape from, and with each passing day, she felt more and more helpless. But amid the darkness, a small spark of hope began to flicker within Zara. She had not yet given up. She had not yet lost the will to fight. She would not let Thrax break her. She would find a way to escape, to survive, to take back her freedom. She had no idea how, but she would find a way. Her family may have bartered her into slavery, but Zara was not going to let them decide her fate. She would fight and she would win, if not for herself, then for the countless others who had been enslaved by the warlord. As the days turned into weeks, Zara's resolve grew stronger. She began to watch the guards closely, looking for weaknesses in their routines. She studied the layout of the palace, trying to find an escape route. And most importantly, she began to hold on to the one thing that Thrax could never take from her: hope. Zara's life in Thrax's palace was a dark and suffocating existence. Every day felt like a struggle to hold on to her sanity, but she knew that she couldn't give in to despair. The guards, though cruel and indifferent, were predictable. Their patrols followed the same pattern day after day, and Zara began to memorize their movements. She had learned that survival depended on patience, and she knew that there would be a moment, just one moment, when she could make her escape. But that moment hadn't come yet. The warlord, Thrax, rarely came to her room, except for when he wanted to remind her of her place. She had been forced to kneel before him, to endure his cold gaze and hear him boast about his power. But Zara had learned to block it out. In her mind, she would retreat to a place where she could still feel some measure of freedom, even if it was just in her thoughts. She would imagine running through the forests of her home, breathing in the fresh air, laughing with the people she had once known. It was a fragile, fleeting thought, but it was the only thing that kept her going. One afternoon, as Zara was cleaning the large hall where she had been assigned to work, she heard a faint noise. It wasn't the usual clanking of armor or the sound of boots on the stone floor. It was something different. A door creaked open, and she turned, startled. Standing in the doorway was a man, a human soldier dressed in the uniform of a peacekeeping force. He was tall, with a strong build, and his dark hair was cut short. His eyes, however, were what struck Zara the most. They were full of determination, but also something softer, something kind. He wasn't one of the guards. In fact, Zara didn't recognize him at all. She felt a mixture of curiosity and fear. Had Thrax sent him to punish her? Or had she finally lost her mind and was imagining his presence? The man looked at her, and for a moment their eyes locked. He didn't say anything at first. Zara, still kneeling, didn't dare to move. The silence stretched between them like a heavy weight. Then finally the man spoke. "You're not from around here, are you?" His voice was low, but it held a note of genuine curiosity. Zara swallowed hard. She had to choose her words carefully. She had no idea who this man was, and trust didn't come easily after everything she had been through. But there was something in his tone, something in the way he looked at her, that made her feel a flicker of hope. "No," Zara replied softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not." The man studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing. "I don't belong here either," he said, stepping closer. "I'm here to help you." Zara's heart skipped a beat. Help her. The thought was almost too impossible to believe. She had grown so accustomed to the cruelty of Thrax's palace and the constant surveillance of the guards that the idea of someone offering help seemed like a cruel joke. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Ethan," the man said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "I'm part of a peacekeeping force, and we've been investigating the unrest in this region. I didn't know what I was walking into when I got here, but I couldn't stand by and do nothing when I saw what was happening to you." Zara didn't know whether to believe him or not. She had heard stories of humans being involved in peacekeeping missions, but she had never encountered one before. They were known for their courage, but also for their reputation as soldiers who fought with honor. Was Ethan really someone she could trust? "I don't want to be here," Zara said quietly. "I don't belong to Thrax. I'm not his property." Ethan's eyes softened. "I know," he said gently. "I don't believe anyone belongs to anyone like that, and I'm here to make sure you don't have to stay here any longer." Zara felt a surge of emotion. Could it be true? Could someone actually want to help her escape? After all the years of suffering, of being treated as nothing more than a tool for political gain, the idea of someone standing up for her seemed too good to be real. "Why?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. "Why would you help me?" Ethan looked down for a moment, as if thinking carefully about his next words. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "I've seen too much injustice in my life, too much pain. I couldn't walk away from this, especially when I saw the look in your eyes. You deserve better than this." Zara felt a knot in her throat. His words were like a balm to her wounded soul, soothing the deep scars that had been left by years of betrayal and suffering. She had never expected to meet someone who cared, someone who would fight for her freedom. It felt almost impossible to believe, yet here he was, standing before her, offering her a chance at something she had lost hope in: freedom. For a moment, Zara didn't know what to say. The shock of his words still lingered in her mind, and she struggled to process everything that was happening. This could be the chance she had been waiting for, the chance to escape the nightmare that had become her life. But then the fear crept in. "How?" she whispered. "How can we escape? Thrax's guards are everywhere. There's no way we can get past them." Ethan's gaze hardened, and for the first time, Zara saw the fierce determination in his eyes. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice full of conviction. "We have to be smart. But we can't wait too long. Thrax is getting more aggressive, and it won't be long before he finds out I'm here." Zara's heart pounded in her chest. She could hardly believe that this man, a stranger to her world, was offering her a way out. But something about him, his strength, his courage, made her believe that he could help her. Maybe it was because he wasn't like the others. He didn't look at her as a possession or a bargaining chip. He looked at her as a person, as someone worth saving. "I'm ready," Zara said, her voice steady now. "I don't care how dangerous it is. I want to leave this place." Ethan gave her a nod of approval. "Good. We're going to need to move quickly. The guards have a pattern, but we won't have much time once we start." The plan was simple: get out of the palace, blend in with the crowds, and find a way off the planet. It was risky, but it was the only chance Zara had. And for the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope. For the first time, she believed that there was a way out of her nightmare. As Ethan began to guide Zara through the winding corridors of the palace, her heart raced with both fear and excitement. Every sound, every creak of the floor beneath her feet made her tense. The guards could be anywhere, but Ethan moved with quiet confidence, his steps sure and steady, and Zara followed him, trusting him more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. They reached a hidden passageway behind a tapestry, and Ethan motioned for Zara to follow him. The narrow passageway led them through the dark, quiet halls of the palace, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Zara felt free. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to escape the chains that bound her. The passage was narrow, and the walls seemed to close in on Zara as she followed Ethan through the dimly lit corridors. The air was heavy with the scent of stone and dust, and her breath quickened with every step they took. She had been in these halls countless times before, but never like this, never with the weight of freedom so close. Ethan moved quietly, his steps sure and deliberate. He seemed to know exactly where they were going, and Zara, though nervous, trusted him completely. She didn't know how he had gotten into the palace or why he had chosen to help her, but in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that he was there, and with him, she had a real chance to escape. They reached a narrow door at the end of the corridor, its surface worn from years of neglect. Ethan motioned for Zara to stay behind him as he cautiously pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, and both of them froze, listening for any sound of approaching guards. But there was nothing, only the sound of their own breathing. Ethan slipped through the door first and gestured for Zara to follow. She stepped into a small, dimly lit room that seemed to have been forgotten by everyone in the palace. There was a dusty table against one wall and a stack of crates in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was a hiding place. A place where they could plan their next move without being caught. Zara's heart was pounding in her chest, and she could feel the sweat on her palms as she gripped the fabric of her tunic. The weight of everything she had been through, her family's betrayal, Thrax's cruelty, and the months of hopelessness, was crashing down on her. But the one thing that kept her going was the small flicker of hope that had ignited when she met Ethan. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long while, she felt as if she had control over her fate. "What now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan crouched down beside her, his eyes scanning the room. "We wait for the right moment," he said quietly. "We can't rush this. The guards are always watching, but there's a way out, I know it." Zara nodded, though her stomach was twisting with nerves. She had never been a patient person, and the idea of waiting, of staying hidden for even a few hours, felt like a form of torture. But Ethan was right. Rushing now would only make things worse. They had to be careful. They had to wait for the perfect opportunity. For what felt like hours, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Zara's mind kept racing, replaying the images of her life before the palace, before Thrax. She remembered the lush forests of her homeworld, the sound of laughter from her friends, the warmth of the sun on her face. And then she thought of Ethan, the man who had come from nowhere, who had risked everything to help her. It was hard to believe that someone like him could exist in such a cruel world, but she knew it was true. She could see it in his eyes, the sincerity and determination that burned brightly within him. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ethan stood up. "It's time," he said, his voice low but firm. "Follow me." Zara stood quickly, her legs stiff from sitting in the same position for so long. She followed Ethan as he moved cautiously toward the door. Every step felt like a leap of faith. They moved through the dark halls of the palace, avoiding the main corridors where guards were stationed. The palace was like a maze, and Zara had memorized every twist and turn. But even with her knowledge of the place, the sense of danger was overwhelming. They could be caught at any moment. As they rounded a corner, a voice echoed through the hallway. Zara froze, her heart skipping a beat. The voice was coming closer, and it was unmistakably the voice of one of the guards. She held her breath, hoping that they wouldn't be noticed. Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled Zara into a small alcove, and they pressed themselves against the wall, barely breathing. The guard's footsteps grew louder, and Zara's pulse raced in her ears. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had never felt so alive, so on edge. Every second was a battle for survival. The guard passed by without noticing them, his footsteps fading into the distance. Zara let out a breath she didn't even realize she was holding. Ethan gave her a brief, reassuring glance before continuing down the hall. They moved in silence, using the shadows to their advantage. Each time they passed a guard or a patrol, they would freeze, waiting for the danger to pass. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, and Zara's nerves were stretched thin, but they couldn't afford to make a mistake. They reached a large iron door at the end of a long corridor. Ethan turned to Zara, his face serious. "This is it," he said. "We're almost there." Zara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had come so far, and now the escape was within reach. But she couldn't shake the feeling of fear that still clung to her. What if they were caught? What if Thrax found them before they could get away? Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the moment. "We're not turning back now," he said, his voice steady. "We're getting out of here together." He pushed the door open, and they stepped into a small courtyard. The night air was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the palace. Zara felt a rush of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. They were not out of danger yet. Ethan led her to a hidden alcove in the corner of the courtyard where a small ship waited, its engine humming quietly. The ship was sleek and unassuming, the perfect vessel for a quick getaway, but Zara's heart was still racing. They were so close, yet so far. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked, his eyes searching hers. Zara looked at the ship, then back at Ethan. She had never been this close to freedom before. She could almost taste it, feel it in the air. She was terrified, but she was also ready. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. They boarded the ship quickly, and Ethan set the coordinates. As the ship rose into the sky, Zara looked out the window at the palace below. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe freely. She was no longer a prisoner. She was no longer at the mercy of Thrax or her family. She was free. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibilities. Zara's heart swelled with a mixture of hope and fear. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain: she would never let anyone control her again. The journey ahead would be difficult, but with Ethan by her side, she believed that anything was possible. As the ship soared through the darkness of space, Zara finally allowed herself to relax. She looked at Ethan, who was focused on the controls, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She owed him her life. And in that moment, she knew that she had found something more precious than freedom. She had found someone who cared. The ship soared through the vastness of space, its engines humming softly as it cut through the stars. Zara sat in the co-pilot seat beside Ethan, her eyes fixed on the view outside the small window. For the first time in months, she felt free. She wasn't confined to the cold, stone walls of Thrax's palace, nor was she at the mercy of the warlord's cruel commands. The weight of her captivity, the weight of her family's betrayal, had been lifted, even if only for the moment. Ethan had set a course for a small, hidden base on the edge of the system, where he had arranged for a contact to help them. The journey would take several hours, but with the immediate danger behind them, there was a strange kind of peace in the air. Zara allowed herself to relax for the first time in a long while, her shoulders loosening, the tension slowly easing from her body. But as the minutes turned into hours, the peace inside the ship was broken by the sound of the communication system buzzing. Ethan glanced at the screen and then quickly silenced it. Zara could see the worry in his eyes, and her stomach twisted with concern. The warlord had to be searching for them by now. His forces were vast, and they would stop at nothing to bring her back. "What is it?" Zara asked, her voice low. "Just a routine scan," Ethan replied, his voice steady, though Zara could tell he was more concerned than he was letting on. "We're approaching the outer rim of the system. If they're looking for us, they might have set up checkpoints." Zara nodded, her pulse quickening. The thought of being caught, dragged back to Thrax's palace, was enough to send a wave of panic through her. She had come so far, she couldn't go back. Ethan's fingers danced over the controls, adjusting their course slightly. He wasn't worried, he was confident. Zara tried to mirror his calm, but inside, her thoughts were racing. Every ship that passed them, every signal from the communication system, made her heart skip a beat. She kept her eyes glued to the window, her mind filled with thoughts of her escape, of the life that awaited her beyond the warlord's reach. Hours passed, and the tension inside the ship grew. The stars outside seemed to blur together as the ship raced toward the base. Zara's nerves were on edge, but she refused to show it. Ethan was keeping the ship low, avoiding any major space lanes, and it was working. They had yet to be detected. Finally, the small, hidden base came into view, a cluster of buildings nestled in the shadow of a barren moon. It was remote, isolated, and for the moment it felt like the safest place in the galaxy. "Almost there," Ethan muttered, his eyes scanning the control panel. He adjusted the ship's altitude, bringing them lower to avoid detection from any long-range scanners. The base's landing pad was just ahead. Zara looked out the window and saw the figures waiting for them. Two people standing beside a small shuttle, the contact Ethan had arranged for. Her stomach knotted again. There was something about being in such a remote place, so far from civilization, that made her feel uneasy. What if the people there were not who they seemed? What if they were working with Thrax? As if reading her thoughts, Ethan turned to her and smiled. "Don't worry, they're trustworthy. They've helped us before." Zara nodded, trying to force herself to relax. She had no choice but to trust him. After everything she had been through, she had to believe that some people still had the capacity for kindness. The ship touched down on the landing pad with a soft thud, and Ethan powered down the engines. The door slid open, and the cool, dusty air of the moon's surface rushed into the cabin. Zara stood, her legs shaky from the long journey, and followed Ethan out of the ship. The two figures on the landing pad were a man and a woman, both wearing simple, rugged clothing. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a serious expression. The woman was shorter, with bright, intelligent eyes and a confident stance. They both watched Zara and Ethan approach. "Ethan," the man said, extending his hand. "Good to see you again. We've got everything ready." "Thanks, Orion," Ethan said, shaking the man's hand. "This is Zara. She's well. She's going to need your help." Orion nodded and gave Zara a warm smile. "No need for introductions. We know what's going on. You're safe here." Zara felt a wave of relief wash over her. Safe. The word felt foreign, almost unreal. She had been in danger for so long, constantly on the run, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid of being found. But now, standing on this remote moon, she could finally allow herself to feel something different. She could finally feel like there was hope. "This is Myra," Orion said, introducing the woman beside him. Myra nodded in greeting, her eyes assessing Zara with a look of quiet understanding. She didn't ask questions. She simply knew the gravity of Zara's situation. "We'll get you situated," Myra said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Come with us." Zara followed them into one of the nearby buildings, which was small but sturdy, with thick metal walls and minimal decoration. It was clear that comfort was secondary to practicality here. The building was a safe haven, a place where people like Ethan and his allies could lie low, away from the reach of people like Thrax. Myra led them to a room at the back of the building where Zara could rest. It was simple, with a small bed, a table, and a chair. But it was clean, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Zara didn't feel like she was being watched, like every move she made was being controlled. She could breathe here. She could be herself. Ethan stood in the doorway, looking at her with a faint smile. "I'll give you some space. I'll be right outside if you need anything." Zara nodded, too tired to speak. Her emotions were overwhelming. She had come so far. She had survived the palace, the journey to freedom, the dangers of space. And now she was finally here. But the relief was bittersweet. There was still so much to process, so much uncertainty about what lay ahead. As Ethan left, Zara sat down on the bed, her head in her hands. The events of the past few weeks played in her mind like a blurry dream, her family's betrayal. The cruelty of Thrax, the long days spent in captivity, and then the moment when she had met Ethan, the moment when everything had started to change. She had never expected to find someone like him in a place so filled with darkness. Someone who cared, who was willing to risk everything for her. It was too much to comprehend. But there was no time to dwell on it, not now. She had to keep moving forward. She had to build a new life, a life where she wasn't a pawn, a life where she could finally have some control over her own destiny. As she lay down on the bed, exhaustion finally overtook her. Her body ached, her muscles sore from the long journey, but her mind was restless. She could still feel the weight of her past, still hear the voices of the people who had betrayed her. But as sleep began to claim her, one thought surfaced, stronger than the rest. She was free. And no one, not even Thrax, could take that away from her. Zara woke to the soft sound of footsteps outside her room. The sun had not yet risen, and the small room was still bathed in the quiet darkness of early morning. She had slept for hours, her body and mind finally allowed to rest after everything she had been through. The bed was simple, but it felt like the most peaceful place she had been in years. No cold stone walls, no guards watching her every move, just silence and safety. For a moment she lay still, listening to the sounds of the base outside, distant voices, the hum of machinery, the soft wind brushing against the building. It felt unreal. She had escaped the palace, left Thrax's reach, and now she was here in a place where she could breathe without fear. But it wasn't all peace. Her thoughts were still haunted by the memories of her life in captivity, the faces of those who had betrayed her, and the uncertainty of the future. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, she would have to face the reality of what she had escaped and what she needed to do next. As the morning light began to filter in through the window, she stood up and stretched, feeling the soreness in her muscles. She had never realized how much tension had been stored in her body until it finally started to ease. She was free, but she knew her journey was far from over. Zara dressed quickly, tying her long hair back as she prepared herself to meet the day. She had to speak with Ethan. She had to know what the next steps were, how they could keep going, and how she could begin to rebuild her life. The past few days had been a whirlwind, and she had barely had time to process everything. But now, with the early hours of the day before her, she had time to think. She left her room and found Ethan in the common area of the base. He was sitting at a table, his eyes scanning a map on a data pad. The same focused expression was on his face, the one that had kept her calm in the most uncertain moments. He looked up as she entered, a small smile spreading across his face. "You're up early," he said, his voice warm. Zara nodded, sitting across from him. "I couldn't sleep much longer. There's too much to think about." Ethan didn't say anything at first. Instead, he gave her a knowing look, as if he understood exactly what she meant. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "I get it," he said. "I've been there. After everything that happened, it's hard to just switch it off, but you're not alone anymore. And we'll figure it out step by step." Zara's gaze softened. I know, it's just everything's changed so quickly. One moment I was trapped in that palace, and the next I'm here in a place I've never been before with people I don't even know. Ethan smiled again, a reassuring, steady smile. It's overwhelming, I'm sure, but you've taken the hardest step. You're free, Zara. That's the most important thing. Zara sat quietly for a moment, letting his words sink in. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to really consider what freedom meant. It wasn't just an escape from captivity. It was a chance to live life on her own terms, to find a way forward without the chains of her past holding her back. It was a chance to heal. What happens now? She asked finally, her voice steady. Ethan's expression became serious. Now we can't stay here forever. Thrax will be looking for you. He won't stop until he has you back, but we can fight back. We'll gather allies, find support, and eventually we'll put an end to his reign of terror. Zara listened intently, her heart beating faster. She had thought about revenge, about making Thrax pay for what he had done to her family, to the people he had destroyed. But she wasn't sure how she could take that first step. She had never been a warrior, never a fighter. She had been a princess, taught to rule with grace and diplomacy, not with weapons, but Ethan believed in her. He had always believed in her. I'm with you, Zara said, her voice clear. Whatever it takes. Ethan's eyes softened, and for a moment the weight of their shared mission hung between them. There was a bond now, one that had grown over the days of escape, of survival, of learning to trust each other. Zara knew that Ethan would not let her down, and she would not let him down either. We'll need to make some moves carefully, Ethan said after a pause. We've got resources here, but we'll need more than that. We'll need to rally others, people who have been hurt by Thrax. We need to build an army, Zara nodded. She had grown up in a palace, surrounded by wealth and power, but she had never truly known what it meant to fight for something bigger than herself. She understood now. She was no longer a princess trapped in a gilded cage. She was a warrior in her own right. I'll help however I can, she said, her voice stronger now. I may not know how to fight with weapons, but I know how to lead. I can bring people together. I can inspire them to take action. Ethan looked at her with a mix of admiration and pride. You've already led by example, Zara. You've shown people that they can fight back. That's the kind of leadership we need. As they spoke, Myra and Orion entered the room, both of them carrying data pads. Myra smiled when she saw Zara sitting with Ethan. We've been going over the intel, Myra said. There are several planets in Thrax's domain where we can make contact with people who might join us, but we'll need to move fast. Orion added, the longer we wait, the harder it will be to stay under Thrax's radar. We've got a window, but it's closing. Zara felt the weight of their words settle over her. There was no time to waste. They had to act, and they had to act now. We'll move out as soon as possible, she said, standing up. I'm ready. The team began to make their preparations. Ethan worked with Orion to secure transportation to the nearest planet where they could make contact with potential allies. Myra worked on organizing supplies, making sure they had everything they would need for the journey ahead. Zara, meanwhile, helped by communicating with various contacts in secret. Her family's betrayal still stung, but she couldn't let that stop her from doing what was right. She was no longer a pawn in a game. She was the one making the moves now. As the day wore on, Zara found herself growing more and more determined. She had a purpose now, a mission that was far bigger than her own pain or fear. The thought of facing Thrax again, of taking down his empire, was daunting, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. Ethan, Myra, and Orion were by her side, and together they would bring him to his knees. Nightfall came quickly, and as the group gathered together to prepare for their next move, Zara couldn't help but feel a sense of hope that had eluded her for so long. The journey ahead would be difficult, but it was hers to take. And for the first time in years, Zara felt like she was finally in control of her own destiny. The future was uncertain, but Zara was ready to face it head-on. No longer a prisoner, no longer a pawn, she was a force to be reckoned with. And no matter what happened, she would fight to make sure that the cruelty of Thrax's reign would never touch anyone again.